Good morning, Wolfpack. It is your former SGA President, Jessamine Reichman-Young here with University President Tania Tetlow and President-elect Freedom Fox Richardson. Now, today, our vision for the virtual town hall would be an opportunity for you, the student, to spill the tea. So what are concerns regarding the student experience? How can we better enhance it? And while you guys continue to log on to our live feed, SGA has kind of went ahead and prepared some questions that we're going to ask President Tetlow. So again, as you come on in, just type in those comment sections, anything you'd like to ask. Let's get started. All right, first of all, how are you doing, President Tetlow?
I'm doing well, all things considering. It feels really good to be on campus. It feels really good to see actual human faces beyond those of my family. This is the most dressed up I've been in a while, although I'm pretty good from the waist up. I realized today that I've been wearing the same flip-flops for a month, so I have tan lines on my feet. But beyond that, just overwhelmed by how well the Loyola community is doing despite all of the craziness that we're living through right now.
No. Most definitely. And I understand that with the coronavirus and us going online, that has definitely shifted a lot of our current progress going on. And so I know that before we went online, the university was actually in the search for the next Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. Would you mind giving the students just a brief update of where that process is right now? And then also more specifically, how can we still engage the student voice in that process? Because usually candidates come to visit the students and have that interaction, so.
Sure. Well, we are, as I'm sure we'll discuss, dealing with the kind of serious financial hit that all of higher ed is facing right now. But despite that, we believe that this position of Chief Equity Officer is critical to the functioning of the university, to everything we want to be and to do. So the search continues. We will fill the position. The search committee was carefully chosen with a lot of student input. I believe you're on the search committee, Jessa. We will find ways. At this point, we're in the choosing of the finalists who would normally come to campus to meet with lots of groups of people so we could get broader input. So we will find creative ways to do that with students, whether it's a big Zoom call or how we do it, we haven't yet figured out, but we absolutely want that. How the candidates engage with students is a really big qualification that we need to get your input and help in determining. So I'm happy to say that goes forward and that we had a pretty remarkable slate of candidates, I think, as you can attest, right? That we have a lot of people we're very excited about. So it will hopefully be an agonizing choice among amazing people, and then we'll get the right person to campus.
Oh, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And then a follow-up question. So this past year, we admitted the most diverse incoming class in regards to ethnicity, in regards to social class, and first-generation students. And so as we continue to welcome more diverse students to Loyola, how do we follow up in the training of our faculty in regards to cultural competency, in regards to making sure how can we make the classroom a more equitable space?
So we've been working on that for a little while now. We've done a few things. So every fall, we've had a mandatory training of all faculty and staff, and we switched off. One year it was Title IX and gender identity issues. This past fall, it was about race and inclusion and diversity writ large. And actually, there were two separate mandatory sessions. So one was around understanding the rules and sort of the why this is both central to our mission and who we are, and it's also the law and the rules and who we intend to be. And another session that was around real better cultural understanding of how you teach well, how you engage well with students, of doing that work better. In addition to that, we had a we asked for a group of faculty who, I think I'm running the numbers in my head, are fairly good 20-25% of our full-time faculty who either opted in or we very much encouraged to do it, to do an online course from Cornell on diversity and inclusion. And that was a I don't know the details, but a fair, months-long, very intensive course. Our provost took it as well, and they said it was pretty extraordinarily helpful for all of them from whatever level they were coming to. So when both for an opportunity for faculty who opt in, where sometimes you're preaching to the choir, where even everyone has something to learn, but often the people most excited to do that are the ones that you least worry about otherwise. But also as a way to help faculty who have, where we've had some evidence or student complaints or concerns, that we get them to do that really in-depth work. We all have ways that we can do better, and I've tried to talk in the language both of mission, of how core this is to us, but also our fundamental job is to meet students where they are, to teach them as best we can, to understand the variety of experiences that they come from, and to help them grow and to learn. And we do that best when we understand them. And there's no world in which you get to decide, well, that's not for me and I opt out of that. That is absolutely crucial to the work that we do. So talking in that language of mission, and that none of these trainings that we've offered are about box checking in any way, that this is fundamental to who we are. So when we had those mandatory trainings, they started with about 20 minutes for me about how critical this is to mission, and to who, and that there's absolutely nothing more important than this, and that we all need to be on board.
No, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. And then my next question would be, is what steps are the university, or what steps is Loyola taking to acquire more diverse faculty and staff? I know it's that difficult conversation of finances, and especially amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah. And so how can we reassure students that diverse faculty and staff is a priority, and also show that?
It is a huge priority for a few reasons. So when we don't have a diverse faculty, it means three things to me. One is that we don't yet have our best and brightest when there are people missing. And two is that the kind of diversity, and I mean that in the broadest sense, of research and interest and experiences that people bring to the table isn't fully there if you don't have people who come from a wide variety of experiences and the subjects they care about and what they teach. And the third thing is that we want to be telling to our very diverse student body that you can do anything you set your mind to, and we need to prove that by knowing that the people that they see in the faculty and administration and the staff reflect that opportunity, that we really do want to demonstrate for you that we hire the best and the brightest. And so all of that is hugely important. In faculty hiring, it is tough because we all collectively in higher ed have to do more work in the pipelines of students of color who get PhDs, which is often the degree necessary to be an academic. We need to do more to expand the pool. We're competing when we go after diverse candidates with schools desperate to also diversify their faculty, so it's tougher. We have two big advantages in that competition. One is our student body, that to come here is to be at a place that where you get to teach the most amazing group of students, and that really helps us stand out. And the other thing is being in a city like New Orleans, which is itself so diverse racially and culturally, and so that helps us compete against rural universities in the middle of nowhere where it's a tougher life for faculty of color. In recruiting those faculty, then we also have to retain them, and there's a lot of work around that because often faculty end up with sort of a double second shift of supporting students of color, of mentoring, of being there for them, and they happily do that work, but it is a lot of extra work for them. And so how we find ways to recognize that. And our problem often with all of this is that we are a university that spends the vast majority of its resources on financial aid for students, that in doing as much as we do to try to make the excellence we provide affordable for students, we provide a much higher percentage of financial aid than most institutions, which means that we aren't paying our faculty the kinds of salaries that they really deserve and that we wish we could pay them, but we're not giving the kind of raises to keep up. And so often we'll lose faculty of color because they get an offer from another institution for significantly more money, and it's not one that we can meet, and as desperate as they are to stay here, and they tell us that they love Loyola, they love the community, they love the students, they get lured away because they want to support their families better. So all of that makes it tough. It's also tough because it's not that you diversify faculty by firing half of them and rehiring new ones. That's not how institutions work, and we can't do that with tenure, and we wouldn't do that. And so it really depends on a moment when you're growing the faculty, right? We have positions open at every moment, and so we're not waiting for that moment of real growth. We'll make sure that every search we do now, that we train search committees, that we really think about how to make sure we're doing everything we can to compete. But at this moment in higher ed, where every institution in the country, and frankly probably the world, has lost serious ground, where we're all taking a huge financial hit, this is not, at this year at least, going to be a time of real growth in faculty. So it's going to be a tough moment to achieve that goal realistically, but it is incredibly important to us, and we will keep pushing for it.
Okay. And then just a quick follow-up question. So beyond hiring diverse faculty, like across the spectrum, how do we make sure that's more equitable, and where we place that faculty? For example, students, when they send in questions, mentioned that there weren't as much diverse faculty in STEM program or in the business. And so if there's not a need or an increase, how can you still meet their needs of like having that diverse teaching?
Well, we do searches for faculty in their field. So it's not that we can hire someone and then say, you go teach STEM. But we've made some progress in business that I'm very excited about. Our new dean there is very proud of working hard to achieve better there. We clearly have work to do. In STEM, it's a real national crisis, the lack of diversity in STEM faculty. So one thing I'm very proud of is that the students who are educated in STEM are so incredibly diverse that we can be part of creating that pipeline and getting more of them into PhD programs such that they can become the academics of the future to help diversify the profession. So it would be sort of the same answer as before, but with even more impetus to try to do well. I met the president of one of the University of Maryland systems, who is famous for, out of that historically white college, creating more African Americans who go into the sciences PhD programs than anyone else. And he speaks quite eloquently of how graduate programs, which we don't have in the sciences, but really need to do better. So we're providing that funnel of undergraduates to get there, and mentoring them in the way that a lot of them I know will become amazing scholars and teachers in the future.
Definitely. Thank you. And then also just staying on the line of just talking about business and STEM programs, a lot of students have really kind of said they had concerns about the incorporation of Jesuit values into those programs. Right. That's kind of like that opt-in mentality when it comes to how do I apply business or economics to the Jesuit value of development of personal potentials. How do you or what steps is Loyola taking to help meet students or help incorporate furthermore the Jesuit values beyond just Loyola core courses?
I think that's really right. We need to do better with that. And the process of the mission priority exam, in which so many students participated in, which made it really important, has focused our planning, even in the midst of chaos, of really prioritizing that mission. And so we're working on what was clear from the exam is we need to do better with formation training of how we both hire for mission, that we, in hiring people, it's not that they need to be Catholic, or particularly steeped in Jesuitness when they get here, although you, like me, grew up in a household where we were literally steeped in that from birth. But that they understand and appreciate our values and what it means to have the values that are in the walkway outside of the library, right? Of that fundamental understanding of higher education, of teaching, of what it is we do, of what we care about, what we prioritize, that we get people on board with that, whatever their faith background or lack thereof. And that's about also then having people understand the language of Jesuit education and values, because a lot of times you might teach similar things, but you could translate it into that language, that when students graduate, they really feel they have that common experience of understanding what Jesuit education is. That if I ask every senior that they could give me examples of what that has meant to them. And I think that's true in many ways already, but we need to do more of that. And so as both the mission examine and the strategic plan, which we have been working on and are now finishing up, but in the midst of very changed circumstances, so we're adjusting, is that's the fundamental priority is how we do more of that training and get it. And I think that's right. And particularly in the sciences and in STEM generally, the Jesuit order themselves were responsible for remarkable scientific discoveries. So I was just reading today that it was a Jesuit priest who figured out that bubonic plague was spread by microorganisms, right?
Right.
Yay. Yeah. I literally was Googling Jesuits and epidemics. And so much of astronomy, and it is, within STEM, some people might think there's a disconnect there, but there's not. The finding God in all things, of really understanding what it means to glory and delight in human knowledge and in scientific achievement, is something that we could do more of talking about in the STEM classroom. At the same time, I will say, in meeting with many of those faculty, the ways they mentor and engage and teach and care about students and cura personalis, I think is profoundly reflective of Jesuit teaching and values and education. So I went into one professor's lab right when I started, and I thought she wanted to tell me about her very important scientific research she does, which I'd read all about, but instead she had pictures on the wall of every student who'd ever served as a research assistant for her, and told me exactly where they were in their careers. This one's a doctor, this one is a professor, and et cetera. And so I do think that there's something profoundly reflective of our mission and values in that as well.
Yeah. And when you talk about the mission and values, you're kind of also speaking to more of the strategic plan and your vision for the university and where you see Loyola in the next 5, 10, 15 years. But it's not only you, it's also the amazing senior vice presidents that you serve with. So could you also just kind of go into detail or give like a brief overview of upper administration, who's who, and how do they relate to the students?
Sure. So Jess and I talked in advance about this, which is why I happen to have a PowerPoint, about how it's interesting for students, I think, to understand more of how a university works, because as a student, you get to, for the most part, be blissfully unaware of that. And I remember when I was an undergrad, starting to dabble in a little bit of it, because I was, as a nerdy student, a student worker in the president's office, and so I got to figure out some of it. So universities so Loyola is a nonprofit, so it's a nonprofit organization. It's not a for-profit corporation. And as such, we're not really owned by the Jesuit order or the church, right? We are a separate nonprofit, and we're governed by a board of trustees. And so those are people, often alums, some of them parents of Loyola students who are very involved. They're often people who've donated a lot of time or money to the university. And in our, for Jesuit University, a good quarter of them are Jesuit priests themselves. That's part of how we maintain our Jesuit identity. So we have a board who governs us, so I report to the board. Then we'll go to the next slide. And then I have a cabinet who report to me. So these are, for the most part, all my direct reports who run the university. So it's a way to understand the university, to understand some of these people. So Carol Markowitz is our Chief Operating Officer and Chief Finance Officer, CFO. So she oversees things like the finance operations of the university, but also facilities, how we keep the campus beautiful and functional and the plumbing working as best possible, technology, IT, payroll, human resources, all of those kind of things that help the university function, because any big organization with hundreds of employees has a lot of that back of house work that needs to be done. All right, next is Chris Wiseman, is a Loyola alum and has been here forever. He's the Vice President of Advancement. So when you graduate, we will be asking you to support Loyola, at first with like your best $5 donation, and eventually for those of you who happen to become fabulously successful, that you'll want to pay forward that opportunity to future Loyola students. And so many of you are on scholarships given by donors who Chris and his team have asked for that money to help us go forward. Okay, next is Father Daffrin. Many of you know, our Vice President of Mission and Identity. So it's core in any Jesuit institution. We are required to have this position that helps us really look out for the core of what we're doing, and both in sort of campus ministry, but also in the fundamentals of who we are and what we do. And Justin is somebody who has had major roles in Jesuit universities around the country, so he brings a lot of different expertise to that. And then Leslie Harris is my chief of staff. This is a job that I used to have, so it's one that's harder to describe, but basically a little bit of everything. And the main thing is that she, when we had McKinsey as a big consultant in the university helping us carry forward our getting financially back on our feet, Leslie took over the role that McKinsey had of organizing us in these constant work groups that report to metrics and KPIs, and we make sure we keep the progress growing. So we had all of McKinsey now replaced by Leslie. She's done remarkable work. Maria Calzada, who is probably one of the most popular people in Loyola's history of the last 100 years. She is not going to remain the permanent provost because all of my begging failed to work. And when we had the search committee talk about a provost, I said, what I really need of my next provost is a Panamanian mathematician with an amazing sense of humor who's totally loved and trusted on this campus. So go forth and find me that. They came pretty close. What a provost does, though, is they oversee all of the academics of the university. So the deans all report to Maria. And those things, questions of who are we as an academic institution, how we push forward, all the budgeting of all the academic units, of institutional research, of the Student Success Center and our retention efforts, those all report to the provost. Right, next is Sarah Kelly, who oversees three things that you are very familiar with. So enrollment, our undergraduate enrollment operation, which includes financial affairs and admissions. So that is in many ways the ballgame for us, is how we recruit students and do it well. So we went with this new way of thinking about that, where we had her oversee both that and the strategy of that, and then marketing, because a lot of what marketing does is really around helping us bring in students. And showing who we are in a way that high school students understand that and value it. And then student affairs. So some of these all used to be cabinet positions. We made them into director positions. So, and then they all report to Dr. Kelly, who in searching, we found the unicorn of someone who'd had all three jobs. So she's been amazing. And next, Tommy Screen, Government and Legal Affairs. So he has about 4 jobs. So everything from risk management, of overseeing our insurance policies, which you can imagine are vast for a big institution, but ward against hurricanes. Sadly, nobody had pandemic insurance. I wish we did. It's very expensive. Government and Legal Affairs, right now we're lobbying Congress hard for federal aid to help higher ed, and so he's working hard on that. General counsel, the legal issues of the university, which are vast, because universities are one of the most highly regulated kinds of institutions that exist in the economy. Everything from Title IX to how we distribute financial aid, et cetera. And then he, on the side, runs the Institute of Politics. So I can tell you that Tommy's job, for example, next door when I was at Tulane, I think I counted 87 people who do the work that Tommy and an assistant do. But when I go through these positions, we are incredibly lean, but these describe the functions of the university. Next that's me. Okay. So you guys know how to reach me.
Perfect.
All right, we can take that down.
Awesome.
But that gives you an idea of sort of the multitude of what we have to do, of everything of worrying about the plumbing to thinking about academic policies and how best to educate students, and then how we grow and who we want to be.
No, most definitely. Thank you so much. And I understand that, like, for students, that was a lot of information. That was a lot of, like, oh my gosh, names. And hopefully you'll go back and you'll look over this or rewatch this live town hall. But the beautiful thing is you're probably still having the question of, now how do I get in contact with them? If I have an issue with the cleanliness of the campus, if I have an issue with, let's say, tuition reimbursement, right now which we're discussing, how do I get in contact with Dr. Sarah Kelly? And while you can personally reach out to them, you also can use Student Government Association. And so a nice part of my job this past year was meeting with the Board of Trustees, having difficult conversations, or even starting those conversations for my successor, Freedom Fox Richardson, to continue. And so I'm going to pass it on over to Freedom to answer some of those questions that are coming up in the live feed right now.
Awesome. So I hope my mic is working. The questions that we'll go ahead and begin with is from Stephanie Adams, and it's to President Tetlow. It's what kind of social distancing or general hygiene measures will be taken should we return in the fall?
So I had a very long meeting this morning with about 40 leaders on campus, everyone from the director of residence life to the head of IT, et cetera, the deans, thinking through exactly this. We are working hard on a plan, and we're doing it consulting with public health experts, with the Ochsner Health System that runs our health clinic. It seems clear to me that there's no world in which we just get to start up in the fall and act like we used to do, which is to gather in enormous clumps of people and hug each other all the time. And I'm so sad about that, I can't tell you, because I am, like Jessa and Freedom, a hugger. So we are thinking through all of that. The kinds of things we imagine are having vulnerable faculty, staff, and students may still need to be more isolated. So we're thinking through how that works. With students, luckily, age-wise, you guys are for the most part not in the highest risks, but there are a few students in our community who are immunosuppressed for various reasons, so we need to protect. Same with faculty and staff. So we will do our best, for example, to not maybe teach in the smallest classrooms, to spread people out to bigger classrooms where they can be farther apart. We're lucky because we're a university where most of our classes are small, right? We're not the kind of place where we have massive 200-person lectures in chemistry class. And so that makes it easier for us to do as we wait for the guidance on how big a gathering is too big. That we will think through things like the dining hall, of whether it's more grab and go, of whether we spread students out in terms of where they eat. We might, let you eat in classrooms more than you would normally, but just so that we're not all stuffed into the Orleans room sitting on top of each other. We need to figure out with residence life of what that looks like. Will we be allowed to have the same density of housing or not? But we will very much have lots of cleaning protocols where we clean spaces more often, where we really focus our cleaning efforts, but we also have the availability of wipes and sprays and things like that, where everyone else can do that constantly and help us with that, so that we all feel comfortable that we wipe down classrooms after we use them, et cetera. This is going to be lots of hand sanitizer. This is going to be lots of social norming campaigns around washing our hands and continuing that effort. And it's really going to be a challenge for students, because we can do all of that in the world, but if all the incoming first-year students then immediately go to the boot and press against each other every night, all of that's going to be for naught. So our effort here is not just to sort of be allowed to open, it's that we need to not have the virus spread across our campus. And so it will be critical that we all do that, and that's true wherever you're going to be, right? So it's not unique to us and not unique to college. But I think we have opportunities on a college campus to really respect each other and to do right by each other that are unique. But we also have challenges because we are, all in this one space. So we really have to find ways to give each other distance.
Oh, definitely.
Gotcha. The next question I have for you comes from Ashley Johnson, and it's on the minds of a lot of seniors, President Tetlow. It says, what actions are being taken regarding graduation for seniors due to Mayor Latoya Cantrell's suggestion to have no longer entertain large events or gatherings for the remainder of 2020 in City of New Orleans?
So I am worried about that. We continue forward with, so May 9th will be our virtual celebration. We got feedback really through student government that having a virtual sort of calling your name online would feel really anticlimactic. And so it's not meant to be a diploma ceremony in that way. We're going to do our very best to make it as special as we can. we have given ourselves more flexibility by starting to disaggregate the celebrations, that it would be by college so we can have it on campus. We're not reliant on the convention center anymore. But I am increasingly worried that all such big gatherings across the nation may not be possible right away. So when we announced that August date, we did it with a great big footnote that it's, you know, that's our hope if we're allowed to do it. So we continue to watch that. We aren't making decisions yet because we get new information every week. But I do think that there's a very real possibility that that may need to be pushed. And so I just know that it's an incredible priority for us to give students the celebration that they deserve, that we want them to have. So if we're not allowed to do that, we obviously won't be able to, but we're going to try our level best and be creative about it.
Yeah. My next question for you, what advice would you give to first-year students that are having a hard time navigating? You talk about seniors not being able to enjoy potentially celebrations like Maroon and Gold or having a virtual commencement. For a lot of high schoolers, they didn't have the proper transition of having a prom or homecoming. And so many of them may be feeling a little awkward, you know, being thrusted into college life. What advice would you give them?
I think this is a moment where we all have to cut ourselves some slack, where we are going to find new and creative ways to engage with each other. So as we brainstorm about the fall of how do we use orientation differently, where it may not be about having Roussel Hall filled to the gills with students and parents. Maybe that part of it becomes virtual. But those small orientation groups, which is where a lot of the work of really starting to connect and build those values comes through, of how we, that is exactly the question I keep asking of everyone as we do this planning. How do we create that connection and that engagement, which is quintessential to the highest values of Loyola? That is what we all love about it the most, is that community. So how do we create that in other ways? And I'll tell you that we will find a way. I mean, I keep thinking back to the early Jesuits and how tight-knit a community they managed to create, even though they sort of scattered around the globe and had to wait 3 months to get a letter from each other. That if you have enough opportunity there to find what students have in common, to connect in the love that is our core principle here, that we will do that and we'll be there for each other. So I have more faith in us than a lot of places to do that, because it's how we roll anyway. But I'm trying to think creatively, and I'd love student ideas about this, of how we, especially for incoming first years, help them become members of student organizations or found their own creative ones, as is kind of a Loyola tradition, and to find those methods of connection that will survive disruption online if it happens again, and that we can do that for students. That said, this has just been an enormous kick in the shins for everybody. And what you all can have a lot of empathy for what high school seniors have lost this year, and what our Loyola seniors have lost this year in the same ways. And I think that we do our best to remember that someday you're going to look back on this and you will be able to describe to your kids and your grandkids of how this helped you grow, of what you learned from it, of the incredible bonding you had in other ways with people around your common experience and the suffering you're going through. And that it's not that you would wish this experience, as I used to always say about Katrina, I would not wish that experience on my worst enemy. But there are parts of it that I wouldn't give up in terms of what I learned and what I went through, and that so many of us did. And so this is all of us learning really quickly that life is full of awful obstacles, and whoever you are, no matter how sort of above all that you feel, as Steve Gleason can attest from his wheelchair, that it's not about the fact that we won't be dealing with those obstacles. It's about what we learn from them, of how we grow from them, and to do our best to go forward.
Now, I have to ask this one just because it is such a Loyola question.
Yeah.
A gentleman by the name of Jodis says, now that we've gotten our reimbursements, is there a way that we can give it back to someone in need at Loyola?
Well, it's not a gentleman. She's a female student who was my student worker in the president's office.
My sincerest
Jonas,
apologies, but that speaks to how well you know your student body.
That is an incredible question, Jonas. And we have on our website the Student Hardship Fund, which is our primary fundraising right now, is to raise money for students. So you could go online and give it back that way. I also know that we've been processing those refunds. I meant to check before I got here about where we are on that, but I think we will have a way that if families want to say, you don't need to give me mine, this is around housing, that please donate it to another family that needs it more. But we have had several families ask that question, which is a very Loyola thing.
Oh. And
Awesome.
I have a quick question, if I may, just follow up. So there's a student relief fund. How can students, is it just on the website if they need to apply for it, and how is that dispersed?
So we're in the process now of figuring that out, and it is harder than it looks to figure out a process where we can be fair, right? Where it isn't just who happens to be first in line given the enormity of the need. We also, the good news is we have from Congress money that's on its way, we have yet to receive, that as part of the CARES Act that is designed to be given to current students to help them with the disruption that the epidemic has caused. We have not yet gotten a lot of clarity from the Department of Education about how that works. The one exciting bit of news we got from the secretary on a big countrywide phone call yesterday was that they are not going to be asking of students to document with receipts how they spent the money, which was a relief because we were worried about that, right? What we need to do is to find out how to give that money, and then along with what we fundraise, we'll do the same way to students. The encouragement is to not just hand it out by head. And if we did that with the money we've received, it would be a couple $100s per student, which would be nice and very helpful to some, but not needed by others. And so what we've been encouraged to do, and what is very Loyola, is to give it out according to need. But how to define that, and how we're allowed to define that, and how we're supposed to administer it has been a process of the government kind of giving us clarity, because if we do it wrong, we can get in trouble. So we're working on that much bigger pot of money. There are processes already. We've always had a student hardship fund. It's not huge, but to help in some ways for many students, lack of $200 can derail a college career. Being able to help with that. We've used it, for example, to buy laptops and tablets to lend to students. We have sent out hotspots both locally and to students elsewhere, to students who don't have any internet access, to make sure that they could continue online. So that's how we've been using it thus far. But we will be communicating with you soon about the process of how to tell us about your needs. In the meantime, we've always had a process of financial aid appeals, and we're starting to get those. There were a lot of families went through unbelievable economic disruption overnight in the last month. And so if financial circumstances has changed, you can go to financial aid, and you should let them know that. And that is one way to help us get a sense of the need that we're talking about.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, final one for you, at least on my end. I'm going to wrap 3 into 1 if I can.
Great.
Some students are fearful that we may not return in the fall semester. Prayerfully we do, but they are asking if Loyola has the safeguards and methods in place to transition online fully for the fall semester.
We are having to plan along with every university in America for that possibility. I am so hoping and praying that we don't have to do that. I think particularly for incoming first-year students, some of whom have never set foot on our campus because their tours were canceled and they couldn't come here, we really very much want to be open in person if we can, even in this hybrid model where we're sort of spread out more, where we're cautious and careful. But what we are working with faculty to do, particularly as soon as they finish teaching you very shortly and get those exams and grades in, is to prepare to teach either way. And that's an incredible amount of work for them, because what we'd like to do is to not just to retrofit the course online, which is what they did unbelievably quickly and unbelievably well. I know that we had hiccups and I know that there were hard parts about it, but as a group, they did a remarkable job, is to plan a class that can be more engaged and interactive, to make full use of technology and not just be the doing your best to put your course on Zoom. And so we are working with faculty about how to do that, how to basically up our game in our pedagogy and how well we teach overall. I mean, hoping this is lasting impact, that to push on some faculty who've taught exactly the same way for 30 years, to use technology to see where it can really add to the quality of teaching is an important thing that I think will have lasting benefits. So for example, I can imagine a lot more use of what's called flipped classes, where the lecture might be on video, but then the discussion section is in person if we're allowed to be in person, or online if it has to be online, but that you can have an asynchronous lecture. And so more and more teaching is starting to turn to that for reasons having nothing to do with the epidemic or the disruption. So that's where we are, but know that it is our top priority right now, in addition to the safety stuff, is how to prepare to teach as well as we can regardless of what happens.
Great, Jess.
Sweet, thank you, Freedom. And I understand that Loyola right now is in such a unique position. We were just came off financial probation. We were wrapping up our admission priority examen, and the future was looking so bright, and we had to readjust really over these last few weeks. And so I guess my final question as we just wrap up is, what do you want students just to look forward to in these next few weeks as we wrap up finals and midterms? And then also, oh, sorry, I got a little cough in my chest. Yeah. And yeah, just what is your final words?
I hope that this is a moment where we will try to model for you all of what it means to be a community of all hands on deck. This is a real existential threat, as you all are feeling, to the economy and to higher ed. And so this is a kick in the shins for us. And I'm very glad it happened after we were out of the downturn that we suffered before, because we're back on our feet again. I'm very sad that it's happening again for reasons entirely out of our control, right at the moment when things were looking so bright. So know that our priority is to protect the essential core of what we do for students, and every conversation we have around that, of how we need to react, of how we protect the institution such that it is around for the next 100 years, in addition to the last 100 years, is about focusing on what students need and protecting that. So I can tell you that every university in the country is making hard choices right now about how to make sure that we all survive and flourish and get through what hopefully will be quite temporary, a downturn. We're all waiting to see how many students just don't come to college next year, right? Which would be an unbelievable impact on this generation. And fighting really hard for Congress to do more for financial aid, of helping you all deal with the different circumstances that you're facing individually and for your families. That just know that this is a place where you are never a number, where we know you so well, where, as a faculty member told me the other day, where she takes pride in not just knowing her students by name, but she learns their middle names just as a personal challenge to herself, right? And so I think that you can know that while we can't take away the uncertainty, because that's outside of our power, we can't take away the pain and the disruption of all of this, that every decision we make will be focused on how to protect your opportunities. And another faculty member told me with tears in his eyes that he was dropping off a laptop to one of his students who needed it to keep going. And that when he saw what her family was doing to give her this opportunity in life, of where she was living and what she was doing to have this chance, that's what we're about, is that we don't want anyone to miss this opportunity in life. And so we're going to do what we need to do to keep the institution going, and that's going to be painful, I suspect, depending on how many of those students don't come next year as incoming first-year students. Your job is to help persuade them to come anyway, help them believe that the investment will be worth it, that we'll get through this as a country and as a world. And I'm just so grateful to you as students for how resilient you've been, of how hard you've worked, of how much you've managed to learn despite the incredible distraction of this. And at some point, it's going to get easier. I can't tell you exactly when, but it's not always going to be this hard. And when I look back at Katrina and what it felt like 15 years ago, where it was so hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel when you're worried about potable water and mold and how things will function again, that we got to this place in this city, in this region of flourishing, of doing beyond surviving, of flourishing, of being something new, of learning the lessons, of getting better. And so we will do that here at Loyola. We will help you make sense of all of this. We'll help you have the kind of lives and careers that make this country a better place. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, President Tetlow. And I'll say, having been in contact with other Jesuit student government presidents and just kind of having this conversation of, hey, what's your administration doing? How are they intentionally reaching out and effectively reaching out amidst this pandemic? It definitely has been reassuring, all that Loyola has done, as well as when we were collecting questions from students to ask today, a lot of them had praises to give. So thank you again for you and your team for all the hard work. And thank you so much for joining us today, President Tetlow, Mr. Freedom Fox Richardson, who is your incoming SGA president. So while we are online, we are still actively working. We have a COVID-19 concern form. There we go. So if there are any concerns that you have as a student in regards to a specific teacher, maybe you have difficulty with the online class, of course reach out to Tania and her team, but then also if you feel more comfortable, feel free to reach out to SGA and we'll advocate on your behalf. As well as we have officially welcomed in Freedom in his cabinet for the 2021 year. Yes. So they are working hard to make sure that the next few months for Loyola are looking beautiful. So thank you again and have a great one.